Oddcast Explorations. Today, we're digging into something fascinating and, frankly, quite serious, based on material submitted by one of you, our listeners.
Yeah, it's a topic that connects something most of us see pretty regularly, the avocado, with a really complex, often dangerous world hidden behind it.
Exactly. We're talking about the Hass avocado, the one everyone loves, and the sort of shadow that organized crime has cast over its production, specifically in Mexico.
It's quite a story, and it really opens your eyes to the hidden costs and the realities behind this fruit that's become such a staple.
And we'll be exploring this complicated picture using only the listener-submitted material you sent in as our guide, helping you understand that journey, from the tree to your kitchen.
Mm-hmm. And the first thing that just jumps out from the material is the scale, the sheer scale of the avocado trade today. It's almost hard to believe.
Right. They call it green gold in Mexico, and it's not hard to see why. It's not just like a successful crop. It's a massive multi-billion-dollar global industry.
The numbers really paint the picture. Think about this. Back in 1985, the U.S. consumed about 436 million pounds of avocados total.
Which sounds like a lot, but
fast forward to 2020, that number, 2.7 billion pounds.
Wow. That's, 6 times more? More than that?
Yeah, it's an incredible explosion. It's a total shift in how people eat, and it created this, unprecedented demand.
And Mexico was perfectly placed to meet that demand, wasn't it? Particularly one state.
Exactly. Michoacán in western Mexico. The climate there, the volcanic soil, it's just ideal for the Hass avocado, the variety everyone wants.
So when trade rules started changing, particularly in the 90s.
With NAFTA, yeah, that was key. As those trade barriers fell, Mexico became the dominant supplier. We're talking roughly 80% of all avocados imported into the U.S. coming from Mexico now.
And Michoacán is the absolute heartland of that, this avocado empire.
No question. But, where there's that much money, especially money generated that quickly,
trouble often follows. That's what the listener material really highlights, this dark side. The very success, the economic boom for many communities, it also attracted organized crime.
A really entangled relationship, as the material puts it. The legitimate business of growing and exporting avocados got deeply intertwined with illegal activities, violence, extortion. It's economically vital, but incredibly dangerous.
And that's the core issue we're exploring today, guided entirely by the information you shared with us. We'll trace how this happened.
Right. The history, how cartels first got involved.
And then the specific tactics they use. Brutal stuff sometimes. Extortion, land grabs, even environmental damage.
We'll look at the current situation, 2025. Some are calling it an Avo war.
We'll also analyze the economic impact. Does it affect prices? What are the costs?
Then how the world is reacting, international responses.
And finally, look ahead. Towards 2030. Is there a way out of this shadow? Can it get better?
It's a serious subject, absolutely.
Yeah.
Real violence, real hardship involved. We'll stick to the facts as presented in the material you sent, aiming for impartiality.
But it's also, weirdly, a gripping story. Almost like something out of a movie, showing how global demand for something simple, like an avocado, can connect to intense local conflicts.
So yeah, settle in. We're going to peel back the layers, maybe.
Nice one. We'll try not to take our guacamole for granted after this.
Okay, so to understand where things are now, we really have to go back. The listener material is clear. Cartel involvement wasn't sudden. It unfolded over decades. A slow creep, really.
Yeah, you have to rewind quite a bit, even before the 90s, before NAFTA. It's interesting. Mexican avocados were actually banned in the U.S. for a long, long time.
Since 1914, believe it or not, the main reason cited was pest concerns. Fear that things like the avocado seed weevil could cross the border and damage U.S. crops.
Right, so that ban was in place for ages.
Yeah.
And then came NAFTA.
The North American Free Trade Agreement, signed in 94, took effect around 97. And the material highlights this as a huge turning point. Mexico saw its growing avocado potential as a major export win.
So they pushed hard in the negotiations.
They did. They basically pushed to get that century-old avocado ban lifted.
Oh, right.
And the trade-off was Mexico opened up its market more to U.S. corn imports.
And it worked. The U.S. started lifting the ban from 1997 onwards. Gradually at first?
Yeah, allowing Hass avocados from certain approved orchards in Michoacán into some U.S. states, but with really strict pest control rules.
And Michoacán, with its perfect climate and soil, was ready as U.S. demand started climbing.
Michoacán farmers were perfectly positioned. The region's economy just boomed like never before. Huge amounts of money started flowing in.
And that kind of wealth, that quick economic activity, well, it didn't go unnoticed by the major criminal groups already operating in Mexico.
Right. In the early 2000s, you start seeing the big drug cartels expanding into Michoacán. The Gulf Cartel, for instance, sent in their enforcement arm, Los Zetas, notoriously violent group.
Were they after the avocados initially?
Not directly. According to the material, their main focus then was controlling drug trafficking routes through Michoacán. But their arrival really shook things up, disrupted the existing criminal balance, and kind of paved the way for deeper criminal influence in legitimate local industries, like agriculture.
And that set the stage for something new in the mid-2000s, a local group.
Yes, La Familia Michoacana, a really powerful, homegrown organization. They were different, had this sort of pseudo-religious ideology, presented themselves as protectors of locals.
While being incredibly brutal themselves, ironically.
Exactly. And the listener material points to them as pioneers in systematically exploiting the avocado boom. Around 2009, they started demanding protection money. The quota
from growers, from businesses, basically taxing the whole industry.
And then around 2011, La Familia kind of fractured. And out of that emerged the Knights Templar Cartel. They took over La Familia's territory and really ramped up the interference in the avocado business.
Led by guys like Lacuta, Servando Gomez Martino.
Right. They saw the state's economy, especially avocados, as their personal piggy bank. And their methods got worse. It wasn't just taxing anymore.
What?
They started forcing farmers off their land, threatening them, making them sell orchards for almost nothing or just abandon them out of fear. They were directly taking over the means of production.
So stealing the farms themselves.
Yeah. And the estimates from that period, say 2009 to 2013, are pretty staggering. The listener material cites reports suggesting cartels were skimming off 10, maybe even 13% of the total profits from avocados through these protection rackets.
10 to 13%. Just gone. An illegal tax on everything. That's incredible.
It became unbearable for many. The violence, the constant demand. So starting around 2013, 2014, communities began to push back. Hard.
The auto defenses, the self-defense militias.
Exactly. People felt they had no other choice.
Yeah.
They organized, armed themselves, tried to kick the cartels out of their towns and protect their livelihoods.
There's that famous example from Tensitaro.
Often called the avocado capital of the world. Huge production there. The farmers and townspeople formed what the media called the Avocado Army.
An armed civilian group, basically.
Determined to drive out the Knights Templar who were terrorizing them.
Yeah.
And initially they had some success. They managed to reclaim some orchards, push the cartel back in certain areas.
There's always a but in these situations, isn't there?
Yeah, the listener material points out the complication. Over time, some of these auto-defensive groups got compromised.
How so?
Some were apparently infiltrated by former cartel members who brought their violent ways with them. Others were allegedly funded by wealthy growers who didn't want to pay the cartel quota anymore, but were maybe willing to pay a different armed group for protection.
Blurring the lines between vigilantes and just another criminal power?
Exactly. It made that pure community resistance really hard to sustain without strong, clean outside support.
And then, just when things were maybe finding some kind of uneasy balance, another player arise. A big one.
2019. The Jalisco New Generation Cartel, CJ&G. Based in the next state over, Jalisco, but hyper-violent and expanding rapidly across Mexico, they decided they wanted a piece of the Michoacán avocado pie.
And they announced their arrival in a truly horrifying way.
August 2019. In Michoacán, right in the heart of avocado country. CJ&G gunmen massacred 19 people, alleged members of a rival local gang called Los Viagras.
And they didn't just kill them.
No. As a terrifying display of power, they hung many of the bodies from a highway overpass for everyone to see.
Dude, that's awful.
And they left a banner, explicitly stating this was about the fight for control over the avocado trade. Billions of dollars at stake.
That incident, that really put this whole issue on the global map, didn't it?
Absolutely. That's when the term blood avocados really started circulating internationally, drawing that uncomfortable comparison to things like blood diamonds, showing how this everyday fruit was fueling extreme violence.
And that kicked off a really intense period of fighting, 2020 to 2022.
Yeah, intense turf wars. The listener material describes Michoacán as completely fragmented, not just CJ&G trying to take over, but maybe a dozen or more criminal groups fighting for control of the valuable avocado regions.
Groups like, well, the remnants of La Familia, the Nueva Familia Michoacana.
Them, Los Viagras, who were targeted but still fighting back, the Cartel de Tepocatepec, plus loads of smaller local factions. constant battles, especially around Europan and the most fertile areas.
And this violence started directly affecting the trade, impacting the U.S.
Definitely. The U.S. became increasingly alarmed. Even back in 2019, U.S. Department of Agriculture inspectors, the people needed on the ground to certify avocados meet U.S. standards, started facing threats in Michoacán. Some were robbed.
So the U.S. government started issuing warnings.
Stern warnings, basically saying, if you can't guarantee the safety of our inspectors, we'll have to stop the imports.
And then in February 2022, that threat became real.
It did. A U.S. safety inspector working in Europan received a direct threat over the phone, reportedly from a cartel figure unhappy with the inspection process.
And the U.S. response was immediate.
Immediate and drastic. The USDA suspended all avocado imports from Michoacán, halted everything.
Wow, just like that. How long did that last?
Only about a week, actually. But the timing was terrible right before the Super Bowl, peak avocado season in the U.S.
Panic in the industry, I bet.
Huge panic. Wholesale prices doubled overnight. It sent shockwaves through the supply chain and really highlighted just how vulnerable this massive trade was to the violence in this one state. A major wake-up call.
So to try and avoid that happening again, to spread the risk,
the U.S. and Mexico agreed to a big change in mid-2022. They authorized a second Mexican state, Jalisco, to also export avocados to the U.S.
Jalisco also grows avocados, and the thinking was maybe the cartel situation there wasn't quite as bad.
Or at least less fragmented, less chaotic than Michoacán at that moment. CJ&G is based in Jalisco, but maybe not the same level of multi-sided warfare specifically over avocados. So Jalisco farmers started going through the certification process.
Breaking Michoacán's decades-long monopoly on U.S. exports.
Exactly. It was a significant diversification. By 2023, Jalisco was already accounting for about 12% of Mexico's national avocado production, with Michoacán still dominant at around 73%, but no longer the only source for the U.S.
But has opening up Jalisco solved the problem in Michoacán?
Not really, according to the listener material. The criminal activity there, especially the extortion, the quota, seems just as entrenched as ever.
There was that report cited from 2024.
Yeah, from the International Crisis Group. It worryingly stated that the same basic extortion schemes set up by La Familia and the Knights Templar over 10 years ago were still very much in place. That suggests just how deep-rooted this criminal taxation has become.
And the violence impacting trade continues. Didn't something happen just recently in 2024?
Yes, June 2024, another incident. 2 Mexican nationals working for the USDA as avocado inspectors were assaulted and briefly detained by armed individuals during a local protest in Michoacán.
And the U.S. reaction.
Another immediate suspension of inspection activities in the state. It shows the U.S. commitment to safety is still paramount.
The stakes are just so high. That trade is worth billions.
Over $3.5 billion a year just from Michoacán exports. The state governor had to step in quickly to resolve the situation and get inspections going again. It shows the immense pressure to keep the avocados flowing.
And on top of all this, there's the environmental damage coming to light.
A huge issue highlighted in the material. Massive illegal deforestation in both Michoacán and Jalisco to clear land for new avocado orchards.
Leading to lawsuits.
Right, like that August 2024 suit filed by a Minnesota nonprofit against big U.S. importers, Westpac and Fresh Del Monte, accusing them of marketing avocados as sustainable while allegedly sourcing from these illegally cleared areas.
It's such a tangled mess. Crime, environmental destruction, international trade, all wrapped up together.
So, yeah, looking back at the timeline based on what you sent us, the pattern is pretty clear. Avocado profits boom. Organized crime tightens its grip. Authorities and communities struggle, often unsuccessfully, to contain the fallout. It's a cycle of success breeding exploitation.
Okay, so let's dig into how they do it. What are the specific methods these cartels use? The listener material outlines a kind of playbook, doesn't it?
It does. A grim playbook for how organized crime embeds itself in agribusiness. And the most basic, most widespread tactic is that extortion, the quota.
The protection fee.
Yeah, although it doesn't offer much real protection, it's demanded from almost everyone along the chain.
Growers, packers, exporters.
Trucking companies, too. Anyone involved in getting that avocado from the orchard to the border. It's the financial lifeblood for many of these groups.
And it's not subtle.
No, it's an open demand. Pay us, or face the consequences. The structure varies. Sometimes it's per hectare of land, sometimes per kilo of fruit harvested. Sometimes it's just a fee to use a certain road without your truck getting hijacked.
The scale must be enormous. Is there any sense of how much money they're making from this?
The listener material gives one chilling anecdote. A local cartel figure reportedly mentioned maybe bragging, maybe complaining about competition. that a rival group was taxing about 80 farmers in just one small area twice a year.
Okay.
And netting around 80 million pesos from just that, which is what, about 4.5 million US dollars a year?
Yeah.
From just 80 farmers.
Wow. That shows how systematic it is. They've built a parallel tax system.
Effectively, yes. And again, during the peak intensity, estimates were 10-13% of growers' profits just vanishing into this black hole.
And if you refuse to pay...
Allays the threat is kidnapping, torture, death. It's that stark. So for many farmers in Michoacán, paying the quota becomes a terrible necessity, a cost of staying alive and in business.
But it goes beyond just taxing people, right? The material talks about land seizures.
Yes, this is the next level, moving from just feeding off the industry to becoming part of it. The Knights Templar were notorious for this, deciding it was more profitable to just take the land.
How? Just brute force.
Pretty much. Intimidation, violence, forcing farmers to sell for a tiny fraction of the land's worth, or just making life so dangerous they had to abandon their orchards.
And then the cartels take over the farms.
Either directly, through frontmen, or by corrupting local officials. They plant their own trees, control the whole process, keep all the profits.
And they control the next step, too. Packing houses.
There were reports of them forcing packing companies to only buy fruit from their cartel-controlled orchards, tightening their grip. They also just invade land, communal land, protected forests, and start planting, driving out anyone who resists.
The material mentioned that family in Jalisco.
Yeah, writing to U.S. officials saying 59 hectares of their land had been invaded and deforested for avocados, despite their refusal to sell. It shows the brazenness of it.
So they become these illegal agro-barons, basically, using violence for vertical integration, turning stolen land into their personal gold mines.
Well, that's a good way to put it. And that leads straight into another devastating tactic: illegal logging and forest clearing.
For more avocado land, causing huge environmental damage.
Especially in Michoacán's beautiful pine-covered mountains, even threatening the Monarch Butterfly Reserve, a World Heritage Site.
How does that work? Do the cartels do the logging themselves?
Not usually directly. The process is often illegal clear-cutting, sometimes followed by deliberately set fires. The cartels provide the muscle. They protect the illegal logging crews.
Why the fires?
Sometimes it's strategic. Setting fires can help bypass laws that restrict converting forest land to agriculture. You need permits, environmental reviews. A fire can sometimes shortcut that, tragically. The material states that virtually all avocado-related deforestation in the region in the last 2 decades is illegal.
So it's not just individual farmers expanding, it's often backed by criminal force.
Yes. They intimidate communities trying to protect the forests, they protect the loggers, and they even profit again by charging growers permission fees to plant on the land they just illegally cleared.
It's a double win for them. More land and reinforces their control.
Exactly. And the environmental cost is immense. Lost habitat, lost biodiversity, major water shortages for communities downstream because the forests that regulate water are gone, plus carbon emissions from the burning.
It makes the story of Charan even more remarkable.
That indigenous community in Michoacán that rose up, kicked out the loggers and the corrupt officials, and now governs itself, protecting its forests, even banning commercial avocado planting there.
A powerful example.
A powerful but very difficult example to replicate. The listener material also notes that many locals are terrified to confront these forest mafias. Speaking out can get you killed.
Okay, so they control land, they destroy forests. What about the fruit once it's grown? Transport.
Big area for profit. Controlling the movement and just outright theft of avocado shipments.
How common is that?
Shockingly common, according to the material. Authorities in Michoacán report an average of 4 truckloads of avocados are hijacked every single day.
4 a day. That number is just staggering.
It is. And it's not always the big cartels. Sometimes it's smaller outfits who can't easily extort orchards, so they just focus on stealing the valuable cargo while it's on the road. Yeah. Gunpoint hijackings.
What happens to the stolen fruit?
It gets laundered, resold on the black market. Once it's out of the original crates and mixed in, it's really hard to trace. Costs millions in losses, and tragically, costs lives too. Truck drivers, security guards, hired to protect the loads. They get killed in these attacks.
Must disrupt the whole supply chain.
Hugely. Delays, massive insurance costs, security costs. It's why you now see armed convoys and private guards escorting avocado trucks out of Michoacán packing houses. Think about that. Heavily armed guards protecting avocados.
It's surreal. And they even tax things like fertilizer.
They try to get a piece of everything. The material mentions the Knights Templar era, coercing local businesses, selling farm supplies, fertilizer, pesticides, equipment to give them a cut.
Fixing prices too.
Reports of that as well. Cartels setting prices for inputs and for shipping and skimming profit off the top.
So even if a farmer somehow avoids the direct crop extortion,
They might still end up paying the cartel tax through inflated costs for everything else they need. It's this sprawling web.
and then there's maybe the darkest part mentioned, forced labor.
Yeah, a less talked about but deeply disturbing aspect. Picking avocados is tough work, but it can pay relatively well during peak season, attracting migrant workers.
But cartels are involved in the labor side too.
Apparently so. Reports of criminal groups infiltrating the labor market, accounts of them essentially recruiting day laborers at gunpoint, using threats to force people, including reportedly underage teens, to pick avocados in cartel-run groves for little or no pay.
That's modern slavery.
Risk analysts cited in the material use exactly that kind of language. Temporary forced labor, potential modern slavery. It's a horrific human rights abuse and creates huge potential liability for companies down the line who might unknowingly buy fruit picked under those conditions.
Important to stress, though, most farms are legitimate.
Absolutely. The material is clear on that. Most farms treat workers fairly. But the cartel influence introduces this incredibly sinister element of abuse into the picture.
So this whole cartel playbook, it covers everything. Taxing, stealing land, destroying forests, controlling transport, maybe even forced labor. It's like a parasitic layer over the whole industry.
It's paradoxical, isn't it?
Yeah.
In a really twisted way, they've sometimes enabled expansion through illegal clearing and imposed a kind of violent order. But they drain the lifeblood out of communities through relentless predation and violence, turning boom towns into battlegrounds.
Which brings us right up to the present day, 2025. What does the landscape look like now, based on the listener material? It sounds like a thriving industry, but under this constant dark cloud.
That's a good description. And a key feature now in Michoacán is fragmentation. It's not one single cartel running the show. It's a messy patchwork.
Different groups controlling different areas.
Yeah, the material suggests maybe a dozen or more factions fighting for control of the avocado territories. CGNG is a huge force, trying to dominate key hubs like Europan. But they face stiff resistance.
From the local groups, the ones who were there before.
Right. The Nueva Familia Michoacana, Los Viagres, the Cartel de Tepalcatepec. These groups often have deeper local roots and are fighting tooth and nail to keep their turf. So you have constant conflict, skirmishes, assassinations, clashes with security forces. It's ongoing.
And the role of those self-defense groups, the auto defenses, is still murky.
Very murky. Groups like Pueblos Unidos say they're protecting growers. But officials quoted in the material often allege many are co-opted or are basically fronts for one cartel fighting another. The line between protector and perpetrator is incredibly blurred. Everyone wants a piece of the green gold. No. And this instability keeps boiling over, affecting the U.S. trade directly.
Like those inspection suspensions. 2022 and again just this year, 2024.
Those were major signals. The 2022 suspension from that direct threat, even though it's short, showed the U.S. wasn't bluffing about safety. Pausing $1 billion trade right before the Super Bowl, that got attention.
And the 2024 incident, the inspectors being assaulted and held.
Reinforced that this isn't just occasional trouble. It's a chronic risk of operating there. Exports restart. But these incidents show the underlying violence is always simmering. And beyond these big events, kidnappings, shootouts near farms, farmers killed for refusing extortion that continues, even if it doesn't always make international news.
That phrase used in the material, productive violence, is chillingly accurate. The avocados keep flowing, the money keeps being made, but the violence is just part of the operating environment.
It puts the Mexican government in an incredibly tough spot. Avocados are vital. Second most valuable crop after corn, around $3 billion in 2022. Michoacán alone exporting over $3.5 billion worth annually.
Massive pressure to keep that trade going, to reassure markets.
Huge pressure. So they deploy the military, the National Guard, they arrest some kingpins, but often arresting leaders just creates a power vacuum and sparks new violence. The results for long-term peace are mixed at best.
The material mentioned President López Obrador's stance sometimes seemed a bit defensive.
Yeah, after the U.S. bans, he reportedly bristled at blaming cartels entirely, suggesting maybe U.S. politics or competitors were exaggerating the problem. It shows how sensitive this is for Mexico's image and economy. They don't want the blood avocado label to stick permanently.
And on the ground, it's a mix of official security and private efforts.
Growers associations like APAIM fund their own security patrols, surveillance, armored transport. But the material suggests many individual farmers feel caught in the middle. They either pay the cartels or rely on auto defenses whose loyalty might be questionable. They feel they have to fend for themselves.
But one big change is that Michoacán isn't the only source for the U.S. anymore. Jalisco coming online was significant.
Hugely significant. For decades, Michoacán had that monopoly due to the pest rules. Opening Jalisco in July 2022 really changed the game.
And Jalisco is ramping up quickly.
By early 2024, they had 11 certified packing plants compared to Michoacán's 58, and accounted for about 12% of national production, carving out a real share of the U.S. market.
And the security situation there may be slightly less chaotic.
Currently seems less fragmented based on the material, less multi-cartel warfare, specifically over avocados. So, having Jalisco as an alternative supplier does reduce the risk of the entire Mexican supply getting cut off by chaos in just one state.
The U.S. market is also technically open to other countries now, right?
Yeah.
Peru, Colombia.
Yes, Colombia got approval back in 2017 and is developing its exports. Peru is also a player. But realistically, there's still tiny fractions of the U.S. market, less than 1% in 2021.
Why is Mexico still so dominant?
Year-round availability, proximity making transport cheaper and faster, and strong U.S. consumer preference for the Mexican Hass avocado. So Mexico, mainly Michoacán and now Jalisco, still holds about 90% of the U.S. market.
So the monopoly is slightly broken, but Mexico is still king by a mile.
Absolutely. Which creates this dynamic for the U.S. Increased vigilance, demanding safety, talking about environmental standards, but still fundamentally dependent on that Mexican supply.
U.S. officials are pretty open about the security problems now, though.
Yes. The material indicates they explicitly acknowledge it. The USDA inspection program includes safety protocols, escorts, and the policy is clear. A credible threat means an immediate trade pause. That's been enforced twice now.
Sending a message?
A clear message. Inspector safety and the integrity of the pest control system come first, even before the flow of avocados.
And concerns are broadening beyond just safety to the environment.
Right. That U.S. ambassador statement in February 2024, calling for barring avocados from illegally deforested land, that signals a potential future direction, linking market access more explicitly to legality and sustainability.
But right now, is there any actual mechanism to block conflict avocados purely because of cartel extortion?
Not a specific functioning policy described in the material. The approach is reactive pause when things flare up badly, resume when it cools down temporarily. There are efforts on traceability, registering orchards, but proving a specific batch is clean of cartel influence is incredibly hard.
And the average American consumer buying avocados probably has no idea about any of this.
Likely not. The material suggests that connection between your guacamole and cartel protection rackets is largely invisible to the end consumer.
So the 2025 picture.
Yeah.
A booming industry, crucial for livelihoods, but operating under siege. A precarious balance. The golden goose needs protection from pests and from gunmen.
Precisely, which leads us to the economics.
Okay.
With all this interference, the extortion, theft, violence, does it actually make avocados more expensive for you, the consumer? Are you paying a blood tax?
That's the $1 million question, isn't it? Or maybe the $3 billion question.
Huh. Right. And the picture is, well, complicated. The listener material really stresses one key point. The main reason avocado prices have climbed over the last decade. It's not primarily the cartels, it's demand.
That explosion in consumption we talked about, quadrupling in the U.S. alone.
Exactly. That massive appetite put huge pressure on supply, naturally pushing prices up. Mexico responded by boosting production dramatically.
Doubling output between 2014 and 2023.
Yeah. And here's the really uncomfortable point the material raises. In a dark, twisted way, the cartels, through their illegal land clearing, actually helped enable some of that production growth.
So they haven't caused a shortage, but maybe facilitated more avocados reaching the market just horribly.
Exactly, at a terrible human and environmental cost. But Michoacán's output kept rising despite the violence. So the baseline price trend is mostly about massive demand meeting increased, albeit sometimes illicitly expanded, supply.
But the cartel activity does cause price shocks, right? Short-term spikes.
Well, absolutely. They don't set the underlying price, but their actions cause sharp volatility. That 2022 U.S. import ban is the perfect example, blocking Michoacán's supply right before the Super Bowl.
Wholesale prices doubled overnight, $30 to $60 a carton.
Yeah. Retailers, restaurants, everyone scrambled. Consumers definitely saw higher prices almost immediately. Even though it only lasted a week, it proved. Security incidents in Michoacán directly hit U.S. supply and prices. Fast.
The 2019 Ural pen violence probably had a similar, if maybe less direct effect.
Made buyers nervous, yeah. Combined with other factors, prices hit records that summer. It backs up that idea from the material. Whenever there's a major cartel flare-up, expect avocado prices to jump.
Okay, so spikes happen. What about the everyday cost of the quota, that shadow tax? Does that filter down?
The material calls it a hidden cost. The main burden falls straight onto the farmers if they're losing 10% or more of their income.
That's money they can't reinvest in the farm, in better methods.
Exactly. Over time, that could subtly slow down productivity growth. It can also bankrupt smaller growers who just can't absorb that constant drain, potentially constraining supply overall.
And the security costs, guards, the armored trucks.
Huge overheads, funded by growers associations, big exporters. That cost has to be factored in somewhere. It adds to the production cost per avocado. So while the farmer pays first, eventually those costs, including paying the quota, which some might just see as another security cost, get passed along.
So avocados are probably somewhat more expensive than they would be in a crime-free world because of these added costs.
That seems logical, based on the material. It's like an invisible cartel surcharge baked into the price, covering losses and protection money.
Affects insurance too, I guess.
Okay.
Investment.
Definitely. Higher insurance premiums for shipping out of risky areas. Companies might hold extra stock as a buffer, adding storage costs. And the instability. It can scare off investors, limiting funds for improving infrastructure like packing plants.
And there's the bigger risk for Mexico losing market share if things get really bad.
That's the nightmare scenario for the industry. A long-term ban, or the conflict commodity labels sticking permanently, that could push buyers to seriously seek alternatives from Peru, Colombia, elsewhere.
But that hasn't happened yet. No big ethical boycott.
Not in a way that's measurably hurt sales, according to the material. Global demand is just so strong right now. The blood avocado term gets headlines, but hasn't shifted mass consumer behavior. People still really want their avocados.
Demand trumps ethics, for now anyway.
Seems that way, but the risk is there. If the situation deteriorates badly, or a major consumer campaign takes hold, that could change.
Globally, prices are driven by lots of things: weather, other countries' harvests. How does Mexican crime fit in the big picture?
Mostly, global prices follow those macro trends. A big, stable Mexican crop actually helps keep world prices steady. The crime adds disruption risk. If violence shuts down part of Michoacán, it's like a hurricane hitting the world's biggest supplier. It will ripple globally.
Analysts are factoring this in now.
Yes, the material says security risk is now part of the avocado market outlook. Food buyers treat Mexican avocados almost like oil from a conflict zone, mostly reliable, but with a known risk of sudden disruption.
So back to the original question, who pays? The material suggests we consumers in wealthy countries are mostly shielded, paying the market price unless there's a big shock.
Largely, yes. The steepest price is paid in Mexico, by the producers losing income, losing land, living in fear, by the community suffering violence and environmental damage, by the people who lose their lives.
That perverse equilibrium again. Money flows, cartels take their cut, consumers get cheap avocados, and the real costs are borne locally.
And that equilibrium likely holds unless something big shifts, sustained public pressure, a long ban, or importers demanding verifiable conflict-free supply chains.
Which leads to how the world is reacting. Is this seen just as Mexico's problem, or is it drawing wider attention?
It's definitely on the international radar, as the listener material shows. Especially for the U.S., the biggest buyer by far. They have the most leverage and the most direct stake in stability.
Protecting their inspectors, ensuring supply.
Right. And the U.S. has gotten more proactive lately. That USDA pre-clearance program isn't just about pests anymore. It includes security protocols, escorts for inspectors in Michoacán, an early warning system.
And they've shown they'll actually use the stick halting imports.
Twice now, 2022 and 2024, sends a powerful message. Safety and system integrity come first, even over billions in trade. They're also working with Mexico on traceability.
To track the fruit better, make it harder to launder stolen or illegal avocados.
That's the goal. Better orchard registration, tracking systems. Hard to implement perfectly, but it's an effort to close loopholes.
Plus the environmental angle push from the U.S.
Yeah, the ambassador calling to block deforestation-linked fruit. That connects trade to environmental standards, implicitly pressuring Mexico on the criminal-backed clearing.
What about law enforcement cooperation across borders?
The material mentions reports of cooperation on the financial side, tracing money laundering from extortion profits, potentially through the U.S. banking system, trying to hit the cartel's wallets. No major public sanctions specifically for avocado crime yet, but it's an area they're looking at.
So a mix of pressure and collaboration from the U.S.
Seems like it. Carrots like market access, sticks like trade pauses, and potential legal actions against importers linked to illegal practices.
And U.S. consumer awareness is growing slowly.
Slowly, yeah. Media coverage helps.
Yeah.
If that awareness reaches a tipping point, it can really force retailers and regulators to demand stricter standards, like happened with conflict diamonds. Not there yet with avocados, but it's possible.
How is Mexico's government and the industry itself responding?
Officially, the government condemns the violence, but often frames it as a general crime issue, trying to avoid tarnishing the avocado industry's image internationally. State governments deploy police, military, offer escorts for harvest convoys.
Is it effective?
Challenges remain huge. Corruption, intimidation, they seriously hamper enforcement. There is collaboration, though. The Agriculture Ministry works with industry groups like APAIM on certifications to keep exports flowing.
Those certifications are evolving beyond just pests.
They're trying, expanding orchard registration to verify against illegal deforestation, at least on paper. The Environment Ministry even proposed a no illegal deforestation clause for the U.S. export agreement, but enforcement is the hard part.
And the industry is doing PR sustainability initiatives.
Definitely. APAIM has its green agenda, promoting reforestation, community projects, aligning with UN goals. It shows they know they need a positive image, even if it doesn't directly fix the security crisis.
The big companies are building their own security. Fortress Avocado.
Pretty much. Heavy investment in private guards, intelligence networks, trying to shield their own operations as best they can.
Looking beyond Mexico, is this avocado crime link unique or happening elsewhere?
The listener material suggests Mexico's situation, especially Michoacán's, is the most acute and deeply rooted right now. You don't see international bodies imposing avocado-specific sanctions over crime yet.
What about other big producers like Colombia or Peru?
Colombia is interesting. Growing fast, great climate, but a history of conflict. The material says they haven't seen cartel meddling on Mexico's scale yet, but the warning signs are there. Rural extortion happens and profitable avocado farms could become targets.
So a risk of the problem spreading.
A real risk. Colombian crime groups extort profitable industries. Avocados could be next. The Colombian government is apparently trying to get ahead of it, promoting cooperatives, traceability, assuring buyers of a clean supply.
And Peru.
Seems calmer, based on the material. Plantations are often in different types of areas, less cartel presence. Scrutiny there is more about water use, not organized crime. They claim less deforestation issues, too.
So different challenges there. Water, labor, maybe, not cartel wars.
Primarily, yes.
No.
Same for places like Chile. But the key takeaway from the material is that the success of Mexican cartels in exploiting avocados is a dangerous example.
Other criminals might try to copy it.
That's the fear. Local mafias in other emerging avocado regions, Central America, maybe even Africa, as exports grow, could try similar tactics, produce theft, extortion. Mexico is a cautionary tale, prompting others to focus on security and traceability early on.
So Mexico's problem is the worst, but the vulnerability is potentially global. International response is mostly soft pressure now, but could get tougher.
Exactly. Demanding more transparency, safety, harder actions like banning deforestation-linked fruit or requiring cartel-free labels are possibilities down the road if things don't improve.
Which brings us to that final segment. Looking ahead to 2030. Is there a way out of this? Can the blood avocado story change?
It's the big question. Forecasting is tough, but the listener material points to some key trends and initiatives shaping the next 5 to 10 years. First, production is expected to keep growing.
More avocados, more money, more temptation for crime.
Potentially, yes.
Yeah.
Mexico's government projects output over 3 million metric tons by 2030, exports over 2 million. Sustained growth. So countermeasures need to be effective.
The industry is pushing sustainability and legality harder.
Doubling down on it. Partly genuine, partly image protection, APM's green agenda, and traceability tech should be much better by 2030.
Like that blockchain idea, tracking individual avocados.
Trials are happening. If widely adopted, it could give strong assurance that fruit is from legal, registered orchards, not illegally cleared land or stolen shipments. It makes laundering much harder if legitimate fruit has a verifiable digital trail.
And buyers might start demanding that.
Very likely, like fair trade coffee. Requiring that level of traceability could become standard for major importers.
Plus, the global pressure on climate and deforestation will only increase by 2030.
Definitely. Mexico has international commitments. pressure will mount to show real progress against illegal deforestation. This could force stricter regulations, either from Mexico itself or imposed by trading partners, or driven by lawsuits like the one in 2024.
And companies facing ESG pressure, environmental, social governance standards.
Huge factor. By 2030, food companies and retailers will need to show their supply chains meet these standards. That includes environmental and social aspects like sourcing from areas free from major criminal control or exploitation.
But certifying no cartels involved seems almost impossible.
It's incredibly difficult. But maybe things like independent audits looking for signs of extortion could become part of a premium conflict-free certification.
A conflict-free avocado label could actually emerge.
It's possible. Public pressure isn't there yet. But more headlines could change that, creating consumer demand for ethically sourced options. That gives an economic incentive for producers in safer areas, or for communities resisting crime.
What about security and law enforcement by 2030? Any hope for improvement?
The optimistic view is the state makes real gains. Realistically, the material suggests progress will likely be slow, incremental. One potential shift is focusing more on the financial side, targeting the money laundering, the financiers making avocado crime pay.
Hitting their wallets.
Exactly. Plus, strengthening local security, maybe effective community policing, working with trustworthy state forces, the Turan model, that successful community resistance. Could it be replicated with support? Maybe some avocado peace zones by 2030?
There's that grim alternative, though. The Pax Mafiosa.
Yeah, where one big cartel, maybe CJNG, crushes the others and imposes its own brutal order. Less chaos, maybe, but still exploitation. Not a good outcome, but historically possible in these situations.
Diversification of supply will likely continue by 2030. U.S. getting more from elsewhere.
Highly likely. Colombia is poised for major growth if they manage security and quality. Peru remains key. Others like Guatemala, Ecuador are planting more.
So Mexico's dominance might shrink a bit?
Probably. Maybe from 90% of U.S. imports down to 70-75%. Which is healthier for supply stability. And maybe the competition incentivizes Mexico to clean up its act to stay competitive.
And within Mexico. More production outside Michoacán?
Also likely. Jalisco is growing. Other states like Nayarit, state of Mexico, could expand if they can offer more stability. Exporters might prefer sourcing from safer areas.
But the risk is just spreading the problem.
That's the catch. Expansion needs to go hand in hand with stronger rule of law in those new areas. The hope is a more distributed industry is less vulnerable to chaos in one region.
And finally, empowering local communities seems key.
A really hopeful trend mentioned in the material. Sharon's example is powerful, growing support from NGOs for grassroots efforts. Maybe by 2030, you could see more communities offering certified conflict-free avocados.
Marketed as such, providing a premium.
If the demand is there, yes. It gives communities an economic reward for taking that dangerous stand. It's an uphill battle. But courage, support, and incentives offer a path.
So the road to 2030 looks tense. Continued growth clashing with exploitation. Hope rests on technology, stronger laws, diversification, and community power.
The alternative is the grim status quo, or worse, the avocado fully becoming a conflict commodity. Given how much the world loves avocados, we all have a stake in how this plays out.
This whole exploration, based on the material you sent us, really is a stark reminder, isn't it? How a booming legal market can get tangled up with crime when governance is weak and the profits are just so huge.
The roots are deep, the challenge is immense. But there's also growing awareness, growing pressure, real initiatives trying to tackle this incredibly complex problem, both inside Mexico and internationally.
So yeah, next time you're slicing into an avocado, maybe pause for a second. Think about its journey.
Did it come from a peaceful family farm that's managing to stay clear? Or did it come from an orchard where the grower lives in fear, forced to pay criminals just so that fruit could make its way to your table?
The choices made by governments, by industry, maybe even by us as consumers, will shape which of those stories becomes the reality for the world's favorite green gold.
Definitely gives you food for thought.
A lot to think about indeed. Thanks for joining us for this exploration based entirely on the material submitted by our listener. You can find links for more information in our show notes.
Stay curious, stay safe, and thanks for listening to Oddcast Explorations.
Until next time.